Picture this, a bride standing alone in a room full of people, tears threatening to spill down her carefully applied makeup, while whispers and cruel laughter echo around her. What happened next at this wedding will restore your faith in love and justice. By the end of this story, you'll understand why sometimes the most powerful revelations come not from what we show the world, but from what we choose to keep hidden until the moment demands truth. The morning sun streamed through the stained glass windows of Rosewood Country Club, casting rainbow patterns across the marble floors. Everything about this venue screamed old money and exclusivity. From the crystal chandeliers that had witnessed decades of high society celebrations to the oil paintings of stern-faced ancestors lining the walls. It was the kind of place where memberships were inherited, not earned, and where your bloodline mattered more than your bank account. Zelara Novak stood in the bridal suite, smoothing down her wedding dress with trembling hands. The gown wasn't from some high-end boutique on Fifth Avenue. It had been lovingly crafted by her late grandmother's weathered fingers, each bead and pearl sewn with prayers for her granddaughter's happiness. The fabric told a story of sacrifice, how Zelara had worked double shifts at the local diner while attending college, saving every penny for her education rather than expensive clothes. At 23, Zelara possessed a quiet beauty that came from within. Her auburn hair cascaded in simple waves, adorned with wildflowers she'd picked that morning from the garden behind her small apartment. She wore her grandmother's pearl necklace, the only valuable thing her family had ever owned, and her mother's wedding ring on a chain close to her heart. Both women had passed away before they could see this day, leaving Zelara to navigate this overwhelming world of wealth and privilege entirely alone. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was getting married in a place where she couldn't afford to eat lunch. But Kieran had insisted on this venue, though she still didn't fully understand why. Her fiancé was a man of few words and many mysteries, someone who spoke softly but carried himself with an authority that made others listen. She'd fallen in love with his kindness, his gentle strength, and the way he looked at her like she was the most precious thing in the world. Today was supposed to be the happiest day of her life, so why did she feel like she was walking into a lion's den? Zelara's story began in Millbrook, a small town where everyone knew everyone, and your reputation was built on your character, not your checkbook. She'd grown up in a house where love was abundant, but money was scarce. Her father worked at the local hardware store, and her mother cleaned houses to make ends meet. They'd died in a car accident during Zelara's freshman year of college, leaving her with nothing but debts and a fierce determination to honor their memory by becoming the teacher she'd always dreamed of being. She'd worked her way through school, tutoring other students, waitressing, and even cleaning offices at night. While her classmates partied, she studied. While they complained about cafeteria food, she was grateful for the free meals that came with her work-study job. She graduated summa cum laude, with a degree in elementary education, and immediately began working at an inner-city school where she could make a real difference in children's lives. That's where her path had crossed with Kieran's, though she'd learn that full story later. For now, all she knew was that he was unlike any man she'd ever met. Quietly confident, deeply thoughtful, and completely unimpressed by the superficial things that seemed to matter so much to everyone else. But today, surrounded by the opulence of Rosewood Country Club, she felt like an imposter, wearing a crown that didn't belong to her. The wedding party had arrived early for photos and the traditional pre-ceremony reception. As guests filtered into the main hall, Zelara couldn't help but notice the sharp contrast between herself and everyone else. The women wore designer gowns that cost more than she made in 6 months, their jewelry catching the light like small suns. The men sported custom-tailored suits and watches that could pay for a year of her student's school supply. At the center of this glittering social constellation stood Vivienne Blackwood Sterling, Kieran's aunt and the unofficial matriarch of the family. At 55, she was perfectly preserved in the way that only unlimited resources could achieve. Her silver hair was styled in an elaborate updo that had probably taken hours to perfect, and her champagne-colored dress hugged her figure with mathematical precision. Diamond earrings the size of cherries dangled from her ears, and she carried herself with the kind of authority that came from never having been told no in her entire life. Vivienne had made her opinion about this union clear from the moment the engagement was announced. She'd never said anything directly. She was too well bred for such vulgarity. But her disapproval hung in the air like expensive perfume, impossible to ignore. As the guests mingled in the pre-ceremony gathering, Zelara found herself increasingly isolated. Conversations would pause when she approached, resuming in whispers after she passed by. She caught fragments of comments. "Do know anything about her family? Works as a teacher of all things? Where did Kieran even meet her?" The pre-ceremony reception was held in the club's Rose Garden Pavilion, where white roses climbed trellises and the afternoon light filtered through ancient oak trees. It should have been magical, but for Zelara it felt more like a trial by fire. She stood near the champagne fountain, nursing a glass of sparkling cider she didn't drink, another mark against her in this crowd, when Vivienne glided over with her entourage of equally well-appointed friends. "Zelara, darling," Vivienne began, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "You look lovely. Though I must say, that dress is quite unique. Did you make it yourself?" The question landed like a verbal slap. In this crowd, handmade meant poor, and poor meant unworthy. "My grandmother made it," Zelara replied, her chin lifting slightly. "She was a seamstress." "How quaint," murmured Cordelia Ashworth, one of Vivienne's closest friends. "I suppose there's something to be said for homemade charm." Laughter tinkled around the circle like breaking glass. Vivienne's smile never wavered. "And remind me, dear, what is it you do for work again?" "I'm a third-grade teacher at Lincoln Elementary, public school," Vivienne said, as if the words tasted bitter. "How noble of you, though I imagine the salary must be quite modest. However, do you manage—" Zelara felt heat rising in her cheeks. "I manage just fine. Teaching is rewarding work." "Oh, I'm sure it is," Cordelia chimed in. "It's just that we're all curious about how you and Kieran met. He's always been so private about his personal life. And then suddenly, he announces he's marrying someone none of us have ever heard of." The circle of women pressed closer, like vultures sensing weakness. "We met through mutual friends," Zelara said carefully, not wanting to reveal the more personal details of their relationship. "Mutual friends?" Vivienne's eyebrows rose. "How interesting. I wasn't aware Kieran had friends we didn't know about. He's always moved in such established circles." Another woman, whom Zelara didn't recognize, leaned in. "I have to ask, and please don't take this the wrong way, but aren't you worried about the adjustment? I mean, Kieran is accustomed to a certain lifestyle. The expectations, the social obligations, the charitable boards and galas. It's a completely different world from," she gestured vaguely, "whatever you're used to." Zelara's hands tightened around her glass. "I think love is about accepting each other as we are." "How refreshingly naive," Vivienne said with a patronizing smile. "But marriage isn't just about love, dear. It's about compatibility, shared backgrounds, common interests. It's about understanding the weight of family reputation and social responsibility." The words cut deeper than they should have, mostly because they echoed Zelara's own deepest fears. What if she really wasn't enough for Kieran? What if this world he came from was too different, too demanding? "I'm sure you mean well," another woman added, "but we're all just concerned for Kieran. He's been through so much, and he deserves someone who truly understands his world." Zelara felt the walls closing in. These women, with their perfect makeup and expensive jewelry, were voicing every insecurity she'd tried to push down. She looked around desperately for Kieran, but he was nowhere to be seen. As the afternoon wore on, the comments became less subtle and more cruel. It started with backhanded compliments about her unique style and interesting background, but gradually escalated into barely concealed contempt. "I just think it's so brave of her," she overheard someone say, "marrying so far above her station, though I do wonder what the prenup looks like." Another voice responded, "There has to be one, surely. The family lawyers wouldn't allow otherwise." Zelara pretended to admire the rose garden while the conversation continued behind her. "I heard she doesn't even have family coming to the wedding. How sad is that?" "Well, what family could she possibly have that would fit in here?" The laughter that followed was like acid on an open wound. When it came time for the formal photographs, the photographer struggled to pose the groups naturally. Zelara stood out like a wildflower in a bouquet of hothouse orchids. Her simple elegance, which had looked perfect in her small apartment mirror, seemed shabby and inadequate under the scrutiny of professional lighting and judgmental eyes. During a break in the photo session, Vivienne cornered Zelara near the coat check. "My dear," she began, her voice low and venomous, "I think we need to have a frank conversation." Zelara's stomach dropped, but she forced herself to stand straight. "About what?" "About what you're doing to my nephew. Kieran is a good man, perhaps too good for his own good. He's always had a soft spot for strays. But marriage is different from charity work." The words hit like physical blows. "I don't know what kind of spell you've cast over him," Vivienne continued, "but everyone in this room can see that you're completely out of your depth. This is embarrassing for our family. We have a reputation to maintain, standards to uphold." Zelara's voice came out as barely a whisper. "I love him." "Love?" Vivienne laughed bitterly. "How wonderfully romantic. But love doesn't teach you which fork to use at a 12-course dinner. Love doesn't help you navigate the social obligations of being a Blackwood. Love doesn't erase the fact that you're a nobody from nowhere who somehow convinced a vulnerable man to make the biggest mistake of his life." Tears began to blur Zelara's vision, but she refused to let them fall. "Not here. Not in front of this woman." "Look around you." Vivienne gestured to the opulent surroundings. "This is Kieran's world. These are his people. And you? You're playing dress-up in a dead woman's gown, pretending to belong somewhere you never will." The final blow came as other guests began to gather around, drawn by the tension like moths to a flame. "I tried to be kind," Vivienne announced to the growing audience. "But someone needs to say what everyone is thinking. This girl is a gold digger who saw an opportunity and took it. Look at her. She can't even afford a proper wedding dress. She's marrying my nephew for his money, and it's pathetic that no one has the courage to stop this farce." The circle of guests murmured their agreement. Some looked uncomfortable but said nothing. Others nodded approvingly at Vivienne's brave honesty. Zelara stood frozen in the center of the storm, her carefully constructed composure finally cracking. Tears spilled down her cheeks, ruining her makeup and confirming everyone's opinion that she didn't belong in this rarefied world. She was alone, completely, utterly alone. Just as Zelara was considering fleeing to the parking lot and never looking back, the sound of the wedding march began to play from the main chapel. The gathered guests began to move toward the ceremony space, their cruel entertainment apparently concluded. But then, the music stopped abruptly. Footsteps echoed across the marble floor, measured, purposeful, commanding. Every head turned toward the sound. Kieran Blackwood appeared in the doorway of the pavilion, and even Zelara, who thought she knew him well, was struck by the transformation. Gone was the quiet, unassuming man she'd fallen in love with. In his place stood someone who radiated authority and barely contained power. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his jaw set in a hard line that spoke of battles fought and won. But it was his eyes that made everyone take a step back, steel gray and blazing with a fury that was all the more frightening for being completely controlled. He took in the scene with a single sweeping glance. Zelara standing alone in the center, tears on her cheeks, surrounded by a circle of well-dressed vultures. Vivienne holding court with her satisfied smile. The other guests looking like children, caught in the middle of something they didn't quite understand. "What," he said quietly, "is going on here?" His voice was soft, but it carried the kind of authority that made generals salute and senators take notes. The pavilion fell silent except for the whisper of wind through the roses. Vivienne recovered first, switching instantly to her most charming persona. "Kieran, darling, we were just having a little chat with your bride. Pre-wedding nerves, you know how it is." Kieran's gaze never left Zelara's face. He saw the tears, the trembling hands, the way she stood like someone who'd been beaten down but refused to fall. "Zelara," he said, crossing to her in 3 long strides, "what happened?" She tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. How could she tell him that his own family thought she was a gold digger, that everyone he'd grown up with believed she wasn't worthy of him? "It's nothing," she whispered, not wanting to cause a scene on their wedding day. But Kieran knew better. He'd spent years reading people's faces, interpreting their silences, understanding what they couldn't or wouldn't say. He turned to face his aunt, and when he spoke, his voice cut through the garden air like a blade. "What did you say to her?" Vivienne's composure began to crack under her nephew's unwavering stare. She'd never seen him like this, cold, commanding, dangerous. "I simply suggested that perhaps she wasn't suited for our family's expectations," she said, trying to maintain her air of superiority. "And what expectations would those be?" Kieran asked, his voice deceptively calm. "You know very well what I mean. The social obligations, the family reputation, the standards we've maintained for generations." "Stop." The single word carried such force that several people actually stepped backward. Kieran reached up and began to unbutton his suit jacket. As he pulled it off, gasps echoed through the pavilion. Underneath, he wore not a typical groom's vest, but a military dress uniform, navy blue with gold trim, immaculately pressed, and covered with ribbons and medals that told the story of extraordinary service and sacrifice. In his chest sat the Distinguished Service Cross, the Silver Star, and at the very top the unmistakable ribbon of the Medal of Honor, the highest military decoration awarded by the United States government. The silence that followed was deafening. Colonel Kieran Blackwood, for that was his true identity, stood before them transformed. This wasn't old money or inherited privilege. This was earned honor, paid for in blood and courage on foreign battlefields. Vivienne's face went white as she recognized the implications. Her nephew wasn't just some wealthy trust fund baby who'd lost his way. He was a decorated war hero, a man who'd served his country with distinction, and earned every ribbon on his chest through acts of valor she couldn't even imagine. "You want to talk about standards?" Kieran's voice remained deadly quiet, but now it carried the weight of absolute moral authority. "You want to discuss what makes someone worthy?" He turned to address the entire gathering, his presence commanding attention like a force of nature. "This woman," he gestured to Zelara, "has spent her life serving others. While you've been counting your dividends and planning your charity galas, she's been in classrooms teaching children who have nothing. She works 60-hour weeks for a salary that wouldn't cover your monthly jewelry budget, and she does it because she believes in making a difference." His voice began to rise, controlled fury giving way to passionate defense. She lost her parents when she was 19 and put herself through college working 3 jobs. She graduated at the top of her class and turned down higher-paying positions to work in inner-city schools, where she could help children who reminded her of herself. Zelara stared at him in amazement. She'd never told him some of these details, but somehow he'd learned them, had taken the time to truly understand her story. "And how did we meet?" Kieran continued, his gray eyes blazing. "At a veterans support group, where she volunteers every Thursday evening, helping soldiers like me deal with PTSD and readjust to civilian life. She doesn't get paid for it. She doesn't get recognition. She does it because she cares about people who are hurting." The revelation hit the crowd like a thunderbolt. Their marriage wasn't some gold-digging scheme. It was a love story born from shared service and mutual respect. She saved my life, Kieran said simply. Not with money or connections or social status. She saved it with kindness, with patience, with the kind of strength that can't be bought or inherited. She saw a broken soldier who was struggling to find his place in the world, and she helped him remember what it meant to be human again. The pavilion remained utterly silent as Kieran's words sank in. The dynamic had completely shifted. These people, who'd spent the afternoon mocking Zelara, now found themselves face to face with their own shallow prejudices. Vivienne looked as if she'd been slapped. Her carefully constructed world of social hierarchies and inherited worth had just been demolished by the nephew she thought she understood. "You stand there in your designer gowns and inherited jewelry," Kieran continued, his voice gaining strength, "talking about standards and worthiness. You've never worked a day in your lives for anything meaningful. Your biggest challenges involve choosing between champagne brands and deciding which charity gala to attend." He moved to stand beside Zelara, taking her trembling hand in his steady one. "This woman has more character in her little finger than this entire room combined. She's taught children to read when their own parents couldn't. She's held the hand of dying veterans in VA hospitals. She's never owned anything expensive in her life. But she's rich in ways that matter: compassion, integrity, genuine love." The crowd began to stir uncomfortably. Some guests were looking at their feet, others whispering to each other. The social dynamics that had seemed so clear an hour ago were crumbling. "You want to know about family reputation?" Kieran's voice rose to a commanding boom. "I've served 3 tours in Afghanistan. I've led soldiers into battle and brought them home safely. I've been awarded the highest honors my country can bestow, and you know what I'm most proud of? That this incredible woman looked past my broken places and loved me anyway." Cordelia Ashworth stepped forward hesitantly. "Kieran, we didn't know." "You didn't know because you never bothered to ask," he cut her off. "You saw what you expected to see, a quiet man with a modest lifestyle who must be hiding family money. It never occurred to you that someone might choose simplicity, might value substance over show." He pulled Zelara closer, and she felt strength flowing from his presence into hers. "I live quietly because I've seen too much noise. I don't flaunt wealth because I've learned what really matters. And I fell in love with Zelara because she understands these truths instinctively." Dr. Harrison Pemberton, an elderly man who'd remained silent throughout the confrontation, cleared his throat. As one of the club's founding members and a retired federal judge, his opinion carried weight even in this crowd. "Colonel Blackwood," he said formally, "I owe you and your bride an apology. We all do." The title hung in the air like a bell toll, forcing everyone to confront the reality of who they'd been insulting. What followed was a masterclass in social dynamics and human psychology. As word spread through the gathering about Kieran's true identity and military service, the same people who'd been sneering at Zelara began approaching her with newfound respect. But Kieran wasn't finished. "Don't you dare," he said, as Vivienne started to approach with what was obviously going to be a carefully crafted apology. "Don't you dare pretend that knowing my military record changes anything about who Zelara is." His aunt stopped in her tracks, her mouth opening and closing wordlessly. "She was worthy of respect an hour ago when you thought I was nobody special. She was worthy of kindness when you believed she was just a teacher from a small town. Her value as a human being doesn't change based on my achievements or my medals." The truth of his words hit home with devastating accuracy. The crowd began to understand the ugly reality of their behavior. They hadn't judged Zelara on her own merits, but on their assumptions about Kieran's status. "This is what's wrong with your world," Kieran continued, his voice heavy with disappointment. "Worth is determined by bank accounts and family names instead of character and actions. You've spent so much time polishing your exterior that you've forgotten what it means to be genuinely good people." Several guests began to leave, unable to face the mirror he was holding up to their behavior. Others remained, looking genuinely ashamed. Vivienne, her perfect composure finally cracking completely, sank into a nearby chair. "Kieran, we didn't understand." "No," he said firmly. "You didn't want to understand. Understanding would have required seeing Zelara as a person instead of a threat to your social order." He turned to address the remaining guests one final time. "The wedding will proceed as planned. Anyone who can't treat my wife with the respect and dignity she deserves is welcome to leave now, because I'm done pretending that breeding and bank accounts matter more than basic human decency." The ceremony that followed was unlike anything Rosewood Country Club had ever witnessed. Word of the confrontation had spread, and the guest list had naturally winnowed itself down to those who were genuinely happy for the couple, and those too ashamed to leave but determined to make amends. As Zelara walked down the aisle on the arm of Kieran's commanding officer, who'd flown in as a surprise, her grandmother's dress no longer looked shabby or out of place. It looked like what it was, a gown made with love, worn by a woman of substance and character. The ceremony itself was beautiful in its simplicity. Kieran had insisted on writing their own vows, and when it came time to speak, his words rang through the chapel with quiet power. "Zelara," he began, his voice steady and sure, "you saw me when I was invisible to myself. You loved me when I was unlovable. You believed in me when I'd forgotten how to believe in anything." Tears flowed freely down Zelara's cheeks, but these were tears of joy and vindication. "I promise to spend the rest of my life proving worthy of your love. I promise to be your shield against anyone who tries to diminish your light. And I promise to love you not despite where you come from, but because of everything that made you who you are." When Zelara spoke her vows, her voice was clear and strong, no longer the trembling whisper of the afternoon. "Kieran, you taught me that love isn't about becoming someone else's idea of perfect. It's about finding someone who sees your imperfections and loves you anyway. You've shown me that true strength comes from protecting others, not from tearing them down." The reception that followed was subdued but genuine. Many guests approached Zelara throughout the evening to offer sincere apologies. Some shared their own stories of feeling judged or excluded, revealing that the morning's cruelty had touched a nerve in people who'd experienced similar treatment. Vivienne, to her credit, eventually approached the couple during the dinner hour. Her earlier arrogance had been replaced by something resembling humility. "I owe you both an apology," she said quietly. "Especially you, Zelara. I was wrong, and there's no excuse for my behavior." Zelara, her confidence restored and her place in this world secured, was gracious in victory. "We all make mistakes when we're afraid," she replied. "The important thing is learning from them." 6 months later, Zelara and Kieran stood in the ballroom of the same country club, but the atmosphere couldn't have been more different. They were hosting the inaugural fundraiser for the Blackwood Foundation, an organization they'd created to provide educational support for military families and scholarships for children from low-income backgrounds. The same people who'd sneered at Zelara's modest background were now writing substantial checks to support causes she'd championed all her life. More importantly, many had become genuine friends, their initial prejudices replaced by respect and admiration. Vivienne had become one of the Foundation's most active board members, channeling her organizational skills and social connections toward meaningful charity work instead of empty social climbing. "You know," Kieran said as they watched the evening's events unfold, "I think this worked out better than we could have planned." Zelara laughed, radiant in a simple black dress that she'd bought with her teacher's salary and wore with complete confidence. "I'm glad you didn't tell me about the military service beforehand," she said. "It was important that they saw who I really was first." "And who you really are," Kieran replied, pulling her close, "is everything I could ever want or need." The evening raised over $500,000 for their causes, but more importantly, it represented a transformation in how this insular community viewed worth and value. Children from backgrounds similar to Zelara's would now have opportunities that had previously been reserved for the privileged few. As their first year of marriage came to a close, Zelara reflected on that traumatic, but ultimately transformative wedding day. The cruelty she'd experienced had been real and painful, but it had also revealed the true character of everyone involved, including herself. She'd learned that she was stronger than she'd known, capable of maintaining her dignity even in the face of vicious attacks. She discovered that real love doesn't just offer comfort, it offers protection and advocacy when needed most. Kieran had shown her a different kind of strength, one that didn't need to prove itself through displays of wealth or status. His quiet confidence and fierce protectiveness had created a safe space where she could be herself without apology. Their marriage became a model for authentic partnership. In a world that often valued appearance over substance, they'd built a relationship based on mutual respect, shared values, and genuine understanding. The Blackwood Foundation continued to grow, funded not just by the wealthy elite but by ordinary people who'd been inspired by Zelara's story. Teachers contributed their modest salaries, veterans donated their benefits, and families gave what they could to support causes that mattered. Most importantly, the next generation of events at Rosewood Country Club had a different feel. The children who received foundation scholarships were welcomed and celebrated, their achievements honored, regardless of their backgrounds. The culture of exclusion and judgment that had poisoned the atmosphere for decades began to give way to something healthier and more inclusive. The story of Zelara and Kieran's wedding became something of a legend in their community, not because of the dramatic revelation or the social comeuppance, but because of the timeless truth it illustrated. True worth cannot be measured by external circumstances. Character isn't inherited, it's built through choices made in difficult moments. Love doesn't require similar backgrounds or equal bank accounts. It requires mutual respect and genuine care for each other's well-being. In a world that often judges quickly and harshly based on superficial characteristics, their story serves as a reminder that we never know the full truth about someone's life or value. The quiet person in the corner might be a decorated hero. The simply dressed woman might possess more wisdom and compassion than those dripping in diamonds. And sometimes, just sometimes, justice comes not through revenge or punishment, but through truth revealed at exactly the right moment, transforming not just individual hearts, but an entire community's understanding of what really matters. Their love story continues to inspire others to look beyond surface appearances, to value substance over show, and to remember that the most important qualities in a person, kindness, integrity, courage, and love, can't be bought, inherited, or faked. They can only be earned through a life lived with purpose and genuine care for others. What did you think of this incredible story? Zelara's journey from humiliation to triumph reminds us that true nobility isn't about where you come from, it's about who you choose to be when life tests your character. Have you ever been judged unfairly based on your appearance, background, or circumstances? Have you witnessed someone being treated poorly because they didn't fit society's narrow definition of worthy? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience might inspire someone else who's facing similar challenges. If this story touched your heart and reminded you that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity and respect, please hit that like button. Your support helps us share more stories that celebrate the triumph of character over circumstance, love over prejudice, and authenticity over pretense. Don't forget to subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss our latest videos. We're committed to bringing you stories that restore your faith in humanity and remind you that real heroes walk among us every day, often unrecognized until their moment to shine arrives. What's the most important lesson you took from Zelara and Kieran's story? Drop a comment and let us know. And remember, the next time you meet someone who seems different from you, take a moment to look beyond the surface. You might just discover that the most extraordinary people often come in the most unexpected packages. Until next time, keep believing in the power of love, the importance of character, and the truth that every person you meet has a story worth hearing. Like this video if it inspired you. Subscribe for more stories that matter, and share this with someone who needs to remember their own worth today.